Welcome to the museum. I am Mary Beth Graybill, the Arlene and Harold Schnitzer Curator of Asian Art at the museum, and I'm going to be our MC today. So, as I said, today is a very special occasion in the museum's history and also with much broader implications. The main event that we celebrate in today's symposium is the repatriation to Korea and to Songgwangsa Monastery of an extraordinarily beautiful Korean painting, the Five Buddhas. We are fortunate in having distinguished guests from Songgwangsa with us today, two monks, one of whom will be speaking to you this afternoon, and several staff, as well as staff from the Jogye Buddhist order. We also honor the stewardship of Robert and Sandra Mattielli, who saved this painting from what would have otherwise been certain destruction. We rejoice in the opportunity to learn about this important work of art from two scholars of international stature. Today has been in the planning for more than a year and a half, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank about 45 people, but that's a long list. So I want to mention that the symposium is in conjunction with this special exhibition, which I hope you've had a chance to see in our Korean gallery. And both the symposium and the exhibition have been funded by the Mildred Schnitzer Asian Lecture Fund and the Cultural Heritage Administration of Korea. But these are some of the other people we want to thank. Of course, Robert and Sandra Mattielli, Songgwangsa Monastery, Dory, Jean Schnitzer, Marks, and Susan Schnitzer, the daughters of Mildred Schnitzer, who continue to support the Mildred Schnitzer Lecture Fund. I've already mentioned the Cultural Heritage Administration of Korea, our partner in doing all the logistics over these past 18 months. We've also received support from, and I want to thank, the Honorable Dak Ho-moon, Consul General for Korea, the Republic of Korea in Seattle, and his office, and the Honorable Greg Caldwell, who's the Honorary Consul for the Republic of Korea in Northern Oregon here in Portland. He's been an indispensable partner, and the Asian Art Council. And within the museum, this couldn't have happened without our having a terrific staff. Many members contributed their energy and skills, preparators, marketing, PR, events, development, and education. But I especially want to, amongst the staff, call out Jan Quivy, the council coordinator, and Sangha Kim, our Cole's curatorial fellow for Asian art, who worked just indefatigably to bring today to fruition. And finally, I have one logistics thing, which is I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. I'm going to alert you that we are going to have a program break, so don't be alarmed. And then finally, I want to welcome to the podium our director, Brian Fariso, whom I want to personally thank for having embraced this project enthusiastically from the very beginning. Brian Fariso.
Thank you, Mary Beth. What an important day for this museum. And as I reflect on this journey, the journey of this object, I think there's a part of this story that goes back almost 10 years ago when I arrived here, and Donald Jenkins, the great curator of Asian art, had retired, and I had a conversation with Harold and Arlene Schnitzer, our wonderful patrons, and I said, we really need to make sure that Asian art continues to be a cornerstone of this institution. And right now, our funding is not in a position to do that. Well, Harold and Arlene responded immediately with a $2 million endowment to support a curator of Asian art. We were extremely fortunate to find Mary Beth Graybill. Dr. Graybill has had an incredible tenure throughout academia as well as other institutions, most recently at the University of Michigan. And I say this because all of what we're talking about today is about scholarship, research, and having a curator who embraces the objects within our galleries and does remarkable work. Mary Beth has set a course for this institution that is broad and wide, and historically significant for this museum. And I'm very, very grateful to her for leading us in this way. And then ultimately, it resulted in the Cultural Heritage Administration of Korea coming and helping us review some of our objects, and revealing that this object had perhaps come from the Sangwon-se monastery. And at that moment, it was about a year and a half ago, we received a letter, and Mary Beth called me up immediately, and she said, "Brian, I think we've got an interesting case on our hands, that the 5 Buddhas painting perhaps was stolen." So we immediately called the Mattiellis, who came in and were very gracious and very thoughtful in their response and saying, how do we repatriate this object? How do we bring this back to where it belongs? And that's really how we got to today. And it's such an important part of, I think, the journey of this object. And you know, repatriation is such a hot topic among museums, and it's a very important topic because it's really about making sure the great cultural treasures are preserved, honored, and for those that are not in their rightful ownership, returned. And that's what we're talking about here. And it's just an honor for me as president of the Association of Art Museum Directors, the association that leads all the museums in North America, to be here today to oversee this repatriation and this very important symposium. Again, I'd like to thank personally on behalf of the entire institution and the community, Sandra and Robert. Thank you, the Mattiellis. What a wonderful gesture you've done, preserving the past and then making sure the past lives today. So a big round of applause for the Mattiellis. And as Mary Beth and I talked about this, it really is not necessarily about ownership, it's about stewardship. And for this museum, we've gained so much through this project. And not only will we celebrate today with this important symposium, but we've had this very fine exhibition that Mary Beth has led. We have a community celebration this evening, as well as deep new partnerships with cultural institutions and dignitaries and the monastery in Korea. The benefits are tremendous for this museum, and so in many ways, this is a celebration of that new opportunity and rebirth in our development of Korean initiatives. I also feel that we've developed new scholarship, we have new bonds and friendship as well, and we will continue in that. In addition to thanking Mary Beth, who I've grown to really appreciate, and she's a wonderful colleague and partner of this institution and of me, I'd also like to thank Robert Buswell and Maya Stiller, who is going to be speaking today. This institution is the link between the academy and the general public. This is an institution that needs to continue to focus on scholarship. We need to make sure that we develop a DNA at this museum where scholarship becomes and continues to be part of what we do. And having them here today, I'm so grateful. Thank you for being with us, and I appreciate you speaking on this important topic. So, again, a big round of applause for them. They'll be coming up in a second. And now I'm going to turn it over to our MC, Mary Beth. And again, thank you everyone for being here. It's just a pleasure to have you at the museum. Thank you.
I forgot to show you that slide. That's for Brian. Now, our next speaker will be one of the 2 monks here for this occasion from Songwangsa Monastery. I'd like to welcome to the stage the Venerable Hyun Bong and his translator, Mi-Suk Lee.
안녕하십니까. 저는 한국 송강사에서 온 현봉 스님입니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hyun Bong from Songgang Temple in Korea.
우리 송강사는 1300년 전에 창건되었으며 한국 불교를 대표하는 승보 사찰입니다.
If I may, I would like to briefly introduce Songgang Temple. Songgang Temple founded approximately 1300 years ago. Songgang Temple is one of the most prominent Buddhist temple in Korea.
한국은 오랜 역사 속에 많은 전쟁과 순환을 겪은 나라입니다.
Historically, in Korea have been had wars many times.
그런 역사 속에서 우리 송강사에서도 많은 순환을 겪으면서 오불도를 분실하게 되었습니다.
Since its foundation, Songgang Temple has repeatedly suffered from wars and natural disasters such as fires and flood. Songgang Temple lost the 5 Buddhas painting during those days.
다행히도 한국 불교를 사랑하시던 로버트 앤 산드라 마티엘리 부부께서 이 오불도를 구하여 소장하시다가 포트 아일랜드 뮤지엄에 기탁하셨습니다.
Fortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Mattielli, who loved Korea culture a lot, they got 5 Buddha's painting in Korea, and 5 Buddha's painting have been trusted to Portland Art Museum so far.
그러다가 이번에 송강사의 오불도를 다시 기증하게 되었습니다.
5 Buddha's painting, which Mr. and Mrs. Mattielli have steadily maintained and generously donated back to Songgang Temple this time.
이 오불도 기증을 기념하여 오늘 이 심포지엄을 개최하게 되었습니다.
Today, we have a symposium to celebrate and remember these 5 Buddhas as a deed of gift.
이 행사는 많은 분들의 깊은 배려와 따뜻한 마음이 모여서 이루어졌습니다.
With a thoughtful consideration and a warm heart, we hold the donation celebration ceremony gratefully.
로버트 앤 산드라 마텔리 부부와 포틀랜드 아트 뮤지엄의 브리안 페리소 관장님을 비롯한 관계자분들, 그리고 한국 문화재청 관계자분들, 주 시애틀 한국 문덕호 총영사를 비롯한 영사관 관계자분들, 대한불교 조계종 관계자분들께서 수고하셨습니다.
5 Buddhas, a Korean icon's journey through time, was made possible. Thank you to the warm generosity and unwavering commitment of Mr. and Mrs. Martinelli. And thank you to Brian Perisor, the director of the Portland Art Museum. And also we thank you to the staff member of Portland Art Museum. And also we thank you to staff member of the Cultural Heritage Administration of Korea, also Joge Order of Korea Buddhism, and the researchers who have extensively studied the sacred paintings for today's symposium, and all the attendees who made today's occasion all the more meaningful.
이번에 이 송강사 역사와 수행 생활에 대해서 발표해 주실 로버트 버스웰 교수님께서는 1975년부터 5년 동안 우리 송강사에 출가하여 직접 승려가 되어 수행을 하셨던 분입니다.
I would like to thanks to Dr. Buswell, and also I would like to introduce a little bit Dr. Buswell. Dr. Buswell was in Songgang Temple to meditate and become a monk for 5 years from 1975.
지금은 UCLA 대학에서 한국의 문화와 불교를 가르치시는 유명한 세계적인 학자이십니다.
Dr. Buswell is a distinguished professor of UCLA to teach Korean Buddhist culture and Buddhism.
오늘 강의를 해주시는 것에 대해서 우리 송강사에서는 이를 영광스럽게 생각하며 깊은 감사를 드립니다.
We also deeply appreciate and thanks to his lecture today, and we think it is really our honor to Songgang Temple.
그리고 마야 스틸러 박사님께서는 지난 10월에 우리 송강사에 오시어 조사 연구를 하셨는데 입체적으로 송강사를 잘 설명해 주실 것입니다.
We also thanks to Dr. Maya Stiller. Dr. Maya Stiller visited Songgang Temple last October, and she did a lot of research on Songgang Temple, and it's very visual research. So we appreciate a lot of lecture today.
이 두 분의 강의는 오불도가 태어나게 된 역사와 사상적인 배경과 그리고 다시 기증받은 오불도가 모셔질 곳에 대해서 여러분들에게 많은 이해를 도와주시게 될 것입니다.
Today's two lecture will give us five Buddhas' historical background and where five Buddhas will return to. So you will get a lot of information today.
다시 한번 이 심포지엄을 마련하시면서 수고해 주신 포틀랜드 아트 뮤지엄의 여러분들께 감사드립니다.
I would like to thank you again to Portland Art Museum of hardworking.
그리고 오늘 함께해 주신 이 심포지엄에 함께해 주신 여러 모든 분들께도 감사드립니다.
I also thank you to all of attendees here today.
Thank you, everybody.
네, 감사합니다. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Hyun Bong. Our first speaker this afternoon, as you have heard, is Dr. Robert Buswell, the Irving and Jean Stone Endowed Chair in Humanities at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where he is also a distinguished professor of Buddhist Studies and director of the Center for Buddhist Studies. A prolific scholar who is active internationally, Dr. Buswell is widely recognized as the foremost scholar of Korean Buddhism, he says of his generation, but I will say in the West, for which, amongst his other accomplishments, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2006. It's just through marvelous karmic wonder that he's here today, because he has very special significance to this event. As you've heard from the Venerable Hyun Bong, he actually has personal experience of Songwangsa Temple. His encounter with Korea began when he went there in the mid-70s to spend 5 years practicing meditation. He was already a Buddhist monk, having been ordained previously in Thailand. He would later recount his experiences at Songwangsa in the Zen Monastic Experience, Buddhist Practice in Contemporary Korea, book published by Princeton in 1992, a small, accessible, very readable paperback that has been widely adopted as a textbook in many college courses on Asian religion. His other monographs about the history of Songwangsa and the monastery's meditative practices include Tracing Back the Radiance, Chinol's Korean Way of Zen, that came out from the University of Hawaii Press in 1983, reissued in 91, and most recently, Numinous Awareness is Never Dark, the Korean master Chinul's excerpts on Zen practice from University of Hawaii Press in 2016. In addition to his historical overview of the monastery, then his talk today will draw on his personal experiences. Please join me in welcoming Professor Robert Buswell to the podium.
It's right there. Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today for many reasons. I think this is the first time in my career I've ever had a chance to actually talk about my old monastery of Songgwangsa. And it's a very nostalgic for me for that reason. Also because we have with us here two monks from the monastery, Venerable Il-hwa Sunim, who is the current prior of the monastery. So he runs the general administrative, he runs the office at the monastery, basically. Also, we have Venerable Hyun Bong Sunim, who is here, who you just heard from. He and I were actually monks together at Songgwangsa over 40 years ago now, if you can believe it. I can't yet, but it is true. He looks much better than I do after those 40 years, I must say. But we used to know him as the farmer monk because back in those days when he was still very young, he was the one in charge of the workers who worked in the fields and would put us to work planting, weeding, and harvesting subsequently. So I'm going to embarrass him a couple of times during this talk and show some pictures of him from back in the early 1970s. As you heard from Mary Beth, the story is rather interesting. I was at a conference and came across Mary Beth. She came up to me a little sheepishly and said, well, I have this story to tell you about this painting we have at the Portland Art Museum. It turns out it's from a monastery in Korea. Do you know anybody who might be able to talk about that monastery if we were to do a symposium? And I said, well, yes, actually, I think I might be able to help you. And so I've been following this story for the last a couple of years now with great interest, actually. It's such a lovely story about how the Mattiellis were able to rescue this painting from oblivion, essentially, in a antique store in the Insadong area of Seoul. And it turns out that of all places, this temple is from my old monastery. So this gives me a chance both to meet them for the first time, to come here to the Portland Art Museum and speak for the first time, to speak for the first time about my old monastery, and to see some old friends from the monastery as well. So I'm going to try to do, you can tell I already speak a little bit too fast, but I'm going to try to do both a history of the monastery to give you some sense of what this place is. I'll talk a little bit about what the distinctive practices of the monastery are, and I'm going to try to wind up very quickly to give you some context to show you what really goes on in a monastery in Korea. So you'll see where this painting is going to go and how it's then going to be used subsequently. First of all, the Songgwangsa is a name means something like Piney Expanse Monastery. And this is a monastery, is one of the largest monasteries in Korea, located in the far southwest of the peninsula on a mountain that's called Choge Mountain here. This is named after the place name of the monastery of the sixth patriarch of the Chan or Zen school in China. And therefore it resonates with the Zen tradition. There are very strong Zen connections to this monastery. It is known in Korea as the Sangha Jewel Temple. In Buddhism, as you may know, there are three main jewels of the tradition. There's the Buddha, who founded the tradition, the Dharma, which are the teachings about the religion, and then there's finally the Sangha, the community of monks and nuns who maintain that tradition. So Songgwangsa has long been known as the Sangha Jewel Monastery because of its long practice traditions. The Buddha Jewel Temple is a monastery called Tongdosa, located in the southeast section of the peninsula, because it enshrines at the monastery the relics of the Buddha that were supposed to have been brought to Korea from China in the 7th century. And rather than having an image installed at Tongdosa, the back of the main shrine hall is actually completely open, and you look out on this reliquary shrine where the relics of the Buddha are said to be enshrined. The Dharma Jewel Temple is the monastery of Haeunsa, and Haeunsa is Oceanic Reflection Monastery, where they have installed all of the wood blocks of the Korean Buddhist canon. This is very much unlike the Christian Bible. This is a massive collection of literature. There are 84,000 wood blocks stored inside the halls at this monastery. There are 4 pages on each of the wood blocks, so you can do the math. There are a lot and lots of pages of the Korean Buddhist canon. But Songgwangsa then is known as the Sungbosachal, the monastery of the jewel of the community of monks and nuns. And because of this long practiced tradition at the monastery that I'll be talking about a little bit today. So here's where you enter the monastery, the reflecting pool and the front entrance of the monastery. But there are very few monasteries that have played quite as extensive a role in the history of the tradition as has Songgwangsa. It's relatively isolated, but it still remains, because of that isolation, one of the major centers of meditative practice in Korea. By the 20th century, the monastery was absolutely massive in size. There had been periodic destruction and reconstruction of the monastery that I'll spare you the details on, but by the early 20th century, it was quite a large monastery. Unfortunately, at the end of the Japanese occupation of Korea in 1945, there was, as you know, considerable upheaval on the peninsula. There were a series of communist rebellions across the peninsula, including one in the south in the Yasu Sunshan area, which led to the periodic depredations of the monastery. In fact, because of these guerrilla activities in that area, the United Nations forces cut down many of the trees surrounding the monastery. So the area was completely deforested because of this. In fact, one of the things we used to do when I was in Korea in the middle 70s was we would spend several days during the year going out and planting trees in the mountains. It was great fun, actually, a nice break from the daily grind of the monastery, in fact. So this Yasu Sunshan rebellion in 1948 sort of forced most of the younger monks to leave the monastery for fear of being picked up in these forced conscriptions that would occur at that time in Korea. So only the most elderly of the monks stayed behind as sort of caretakers for the monastery and to maintain the regular rituals of the monastery. Unfortunately, in 1951, the ultimate atrocity took place, and the elderly monks who were remaining in the monastery were all brutally butchered by the guerrillas at that time, and the monastery underwent further depredations. During the Korean War, then in 1951, there was an Allied attack that tried to push out the last remaining remnants of the guerrillas, and at that time, the entire central portion of the monastery was burned to the ground. This included the library of the monastery, which was a massive collection of materials. It included most of the major halls where monks were in residence, and the main shrine hall as well. And so once again, as has happened periodically during history, Songgwangsa was reduced to ashes. After the end of the war, the monastery was revived by a number of important monks. I have one picture I'm going to show you, which is of a very early monk there from in the 1950s and early 60s, who began to do a reconstruction of the project of the monastery. This is the monk named Hyun Bong here in the center. He's laughing because he knows all these monks very well. This is a very old picture. This is the current pangjang of the monastery, Posang Sunim. This is Hyun Sunim, who was also an abbot just before Hyun Bong Sunim, in fact, who did one of the major reconstructions of the monastery. And this tall, scruffy monk in the back may look somewhat familiar if you take me back about 45 years or so. So all of these monks here were instrumental in rebuilding the monastery, but I think the real key to this project was the efforts of a Zen master, pangjang, named Kusan Suryan, and this was the teacher under whom I was reordained in Korea and was the teacher of Hyun Bong Sunim as well. Here he is decked out in all his regalia as a Zen master, the large rosary, the fly whisk, which is a symbol of the office at the Zen master's quarter there. And I'll just show a couple more. This is a much more informal picture of Kusan Sunim lighting the fire underneath the ondul floor in his room. And here he is with his very earnest and much taller disciple. I noticed all my pictures I have with Kusan Sunim, I'm always sort of leaning over, trying not to tower over this man. Despite being about probably no bigger than 4'10", he was really a towering presence in the monastery, much stronger than I was, certainly, even though I was 6'1". So. But he commenced a large-scale reconstruction of the monastery, which included people like Bong Sinim, Hyun Sinim, and then also our Hyun Bong Sinim here also, were instrumental in rebuilding the monastery to large scale once again. This included building a new shrine hall that they took the old shrine hall apart piece by piece and reconstructed it elsewhere on the monastery grounds and built a large new shrine hall right in the center. And because of this, there was a new museum built. There was new halls for lay retreats, for lay people to come and do practice there as well, new visitors' quarters, and on down the line. So today, you'll see this slide when Professor Stiller does her presentation as well. But this is a massive complex that is in a very beautiful setting at the same time, too. In 1968, with Kusan's presence at Songgwangsa, the monastery was redesignated a chongnim. Chongnim means literally grove of trees, but this is used in Korea to refer to these very large monastic compounds where the full panoply of Korean Buddhist practice is maintained and sustained. So not only Zen meditation practice, but also scriptural study of sutras and commentarial literature, ritual practice, reciting the Buddha's name. So the whole panoply of practices that are performed in Korean Buddhism are kept at these chongnim. And Songgwangsa was the first monastery after the biggest monastery of all, Haeunsa, to be designated a chongnim in Korea following the Korean War then. But the real history of the monastery begins with a monk named Chinol, or Pojo Guksa, the state preceptor Polil Pojo. I always like his name. Chinol means something like knowing reticence is how I translate this, but it really means something like almost stuttering wisdom in a sense. And I always took this to heart because I'm somewhat the same way too. So Chinol, we have some evidence that there may have been something at the site where Songgwangsa was finally established, maybe as early as the late Shilla dynasty, so 9th century or so. We're told that there was a monk named He Lin who built a very small temple there that was called Kilsangsa. There's some evidence that this may be a later fabrication, but there's also some evidence that there was at least something on the site when Chinol established the monastery that we now know as Songgwangsa on this place. In the late 12th century, he established a retreat society called the Janghesa, the Samadhi and Prajna, or Concentration and Wisdom Society, with a group of fellow monks. They were practicing mostly over in the Gyeongsang region of Korea. But this Janghesa began to grow dramatically to the point that the site where he was living, Kojosa, was much too small. So he sent out a disciple named Suu to go look around the peninsula for a place where they could reestablish this retreat society. And Suu and his colleagues came across this site down in the southwest on what was then called Songgwang Mountain. And even though the temple, what was left of it, was completely dilapidated, the site they thought would be a really good site for a large monastery. And the monks decided that this would be the ideal place to reestablish this Janghesa. And so this is where it was finally moved in around 1207 then. What's interesting about this Janghesa, which eventually is moved then to the site of what we now know as Songgwangsa, is that Chinol is quite distinctive, I think, in Korean Buddhism. He is looking to try to find a way to reconcile what he saw as two rather disparate strands of Korean Buddhist training at that time. One strand based more on scriptural study, kind of a scholastic study of Buddhism, and another strand based more on Zen meditation practice. He tried to bring both of these things together so that they could work harmoniously for the greater benefit of both Buddhist lay people and ordained. And let me see here. So yeah, this is another case where Jinul is actually still in residence at the monastery. His reliquary stupa is located on the highest site of the monastery grounds, overlooking the rest of the monastery. So here's his stupa, here's his stele or cenotaph, and here's the entire monastery grounds below, looking over it. Jinul's approach to practice is based upon what he calls dono jamsu, this sudden awakening, gradual cultivation. And what he means by this is that in his mind, Buddhist practice has to start with a direct insight into one's own true nature, the true nature of Buddhahood. And by having a sudden awakening to this reality, this will completely change and restructure one's connection to and place in the world, one's understanding of one's place in that world. After this initial experience of sudden awakening, one then has to go forward to continue to practice, developing a whole series of techniques, of meditative techniques, that will allow one not only to know you're enlightened, to be enlightened, but also to act like you're enlightened. There is a difference. He says that when you first realize your true nature, you realize that you are now and have always been a Buddha. But there are still these tendencies of mind, these habituations that we have created over a multitude of lifetimes in the Buddhist sense, which have gradually to be removed by various kinds of counteractive techniques. And this process is what he calls gradual cultivation. So you have this initial insight through a sudden awakening, followed by gradual cultivation. And he gives a couple of analogies here, which I think are pretty clear. It's like a baby who is born. With any luck, that infant has 10 fingers and 10 toes and 2 eyes and is a human being. There's no difference whatsoever between an infant human being and an adult human being, and yet there is. They have to grow up, they have to mature and learn how to act upon all the potential that's there when they are born as infants to truly become an active, functioning adult. And the same with the enlightenment experience. You may have this initial experience of awakening, but it has to be matured so that one can bring it into all of one's action over time through gradual cultivation. Or like the sun rising in the morning on the dew, and the dew very gradually evaporates over time from that. This process is one of the principal ways that this sudden awakening is catalyzed, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, is through the Zen of investigated meditative topics, this Kanhwa Sun process. And this uses the statements, rather enigmatic statements of earlier Zen masters as grist for the mill of meditation training. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about how that actually goes forward. So in around 1207, then Jinul moves his society to this new monastery that we now call Songgwangsa. It had a different name at the time, but I won't bother you with all that. He is appointed at the moment of his death as a state preceptor, and he designates, just before he dies, a disciple named Haeshim, Jingak-guksa actually, as his main successor. And it really is through Jinul and then his successor, Jingak-guksa, that Songgwangsa becomes recognized as a major center of Buddhist practice in Korea. Interestingly enough, Hyun Bong S님, who's here with us today, after his stint as abbot, he dedicated himself to rebuilding the hermitage where Jingak-guksa lived. Hermitage that's in the mountains in back of the monastery. And he says that he now lives sort of taking care of the stupa, of the reliquary of Jingak-guksa, actually, instead. And after Haeshim, we're told, a series of 14 other state preceptors who succeeded Jinul and then Jingak-guksa, Haeshim, over the remainder of the Koryo dynasty into the early part of the Joseon dynasty. And because of this strong practice tradition that was forged at Songgwangsa through all of these state preceptors, these very eminent senior monks, Songgwangsa has been designated traditionally the Sangha Jewel Monastery, the Sangbo Sachar, Sangbo Jongchar in Korean Buddhism. Now, a little bit of background you've had on the history already. Let me tell you a little bit about what goes on at a monastery like Songgwangsa. First of all, when monks or nuns decide to join the monastery community, they enter as what are called hengja, as postulants, during which time they're engaged in doing much of the manual labor around the monastery. They're working in the fields, working in the kitchen, cleaning out the latrine, doing all of the dirty work of the monastery, in fact. But during this time, they're also learning the basic ritual and the lifestyle of the monastery. The monastery is watching them to see if they'll be a good fit for them. They're sort of finding out whether they can really survive and handle this very rigorous sort of monastic life or not. And after the 6-month postulancy, they then would be ordained as novice monks or nuns. And here I have a picture of some nuns going through the ordination. After a period in the novitiate, this can be upwards of 3 years or even longer in some cases, depending upon the monk or the nun's preference. They would be ordained as fully ordained monks, receiving both the full monastic precepts of the bhikshu or bhikshuni, the bhikkhu or bhikkhuni in Korea, and also the bodhisattva precepts. And so here we have, this is an ordination procedure that I went through. This is Kusan Sunim here as the preceptor. This is Haksan Sunim 있죠, 이분. Yeah, Haksan Sunim is the witness here, and these are all the ordination certificates that are stacked up there. So there were a couple hundred people going through the ordination at Songgwangsa here. After ordination, at the very conclusion of this, they burn the arm as sort of a symbol of one's dedication to the monastic life. There's a small burn placed on there with Maksabashchin as well to indicate this. And then the monks, after the ordination, return probably to where they already were, probably working in the kitchen, but now rather than doing all the manual labor, they're supervising the other hengjas doing all the manual labor instead. And this includes building the fires underneath the ondo floors. These fires also are heat cauldrons in which all of the rice is cooked in the monastery. At the same time, the fire goes under the floor, heats the floor, and warms up the room. And here we have our 누구인지 아시죠? Hyun Bong 스님. This is Hyun Bong 스님 here. Rather young Hyun Bong 스님 also making the fire at the monastery. I had to work very hard to get this photograph, I can tell you. And this is how they end up then. The fire comes out the other end. Here's the chimney where the smoke is coming out. This is a typical compound at a kitchen. You have, these are all the ongi pots where all the kimchi that is made in Korea would be stored. The fire goes underneath the flues in the floor here and comes out the other end and heats up the buildings this way. So the younger monks are working in the fields, working in the kitchen, working in the office, and usually only maybe once or twice during the growing season will all of the monastery come out to the fields in order to coordinate activities. So when you weed the fields, for example, you need the whole monastery out, and this will take several days to do. So this is what Hyun Bong 스님 was often in charge of when he was at Songgwangsa, was running the field operation of the monastery. So you would do the planting, the weeding, and then finally the harvesting, which would be when you make all the kimchi for the entire year during the spring. And just one last picture of Hyun Bong 스님 out in the farm, doing his work. At the same time, doing all this work, you're also doing regular services. There are morning and evening services done regularly, and often various monks will have the office of verger of a shrine hall. Well, they'll be in charge of running and performing the worship service morning and evening. There's also a noontime service where all the monks of the monastery will participate, where an offering is made to the Buddha. This is brought back to either the refectory or to a hall that will serve as a refectory, and all the monks will eat food together. This is a picture taken during the retreat period in Korea. In Korea, all monasteries follow the same annual schedule. which is that during the 3 months of winter and summer, which are the most difficult seasons in Korea, this is a period of retreat when the monks are required to stay in residence at the monastery. They're not allowed even to go outside the front gate. They have to be in residence for the entire 3 months. And a big monastery like Songgwangsa will end up with often over 100 people in residence during the retreat periods. Some will be in meditation hall, some will be in the seminary, some will be working in the monastery. We'll have various offices that they are holding. There will be attendants to senior monks. So there are a whole range of offices that have to be filled each retreat season. On the first day of the free season, which could be during the spring and the fall, these are the most beautiful seasons in Korea. I hear the Matyelis may have an opportunity to go to Korea, to Songgwangsa later, and I very much hope they're able to go in the spring. That's certainly the best season in Korea. At that time, the monks are free to go out on pilgrimage or to travel, and this they do with abandon. So here is the exact same picture at the exact same time of day after the noontime service with the monks who are in residence during the free season. We've dropped from over 100 to a handful. And this, whoops, I'm sorry. Oh well, I can't go back, so we'll just ignore it. But so we have only a few monks in residence at the time then. And this is very typical of Korea, to have these massive waves of monks traveling during the free season and in residence at specific monasteries during the retreat season then. So this is the noontime service after that procession that I just showed you here. When I was at Songgwangsa, we didn't have a formal refectory building. Instead, we used really any large room as a refectory. The bowls would be placed around the perimeter of the room on shelves. You would go in for the meal, take your bowls off the shelf, spread them out. There were 4 bowls that you used for the meal. The meal would be served. You would eat the meal. You would clean up your bowls right at that spot, put your bowls back on the shelf, and the entire process took about half an hour. This included various chants that were done during the course of the offering. So I think the actual meal time was maybe about 8 minutes of that half hour. So I learned this to my chagrin the very first meal I had at Songgwangsa as a monk, where I had my food all laid out and I was enjoying all this good vegetarian food, and I had taken literally 2 bites and realized everyone else was finished. So I had to wolf down whatever was left and move on then instead. So I learned very quickly how to eat very, very quickly in monasteries, as everyone does. So after having spent some time then perhaps working in the monastery as a novice monk, or even as a young fully ordained monk or nun, monks may start to begin their more formal training. This can be seminary study, where they're studying Buddhist scriptures, but also they're studying some of the basic texts about Zen meditation practice, giving them the foundation for practice. Meditation can be quite rigorous in Korea, and without having that grounding in the theory of the practice, it can sometimes be hard to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. So what this does is ensure that monks really understand the system. They know why it's supposed to work. It'll give them some basic grounding in that practice, so that when they start in meditation later, they'll know what they're doing and why they're doing it. This is a typical seminary. This is the modern seminary at Songgwangsa, much bigger. There are well over 50 monks in seminary study there. So during the retreat season, you're usually in residence in one of these, like the seminary or the meditation hall. During the free season, you can sometimes go down to a private room and study, and this is the room where I stayed when I was at Songgwangsa, where I wrote my first book, actually, when I was there, in this corner room at Songgwangsa, just down below. So after maybe 3 years of seminary study, where you've done some of the basic Buddhist sutras, you've learned the grounding of Zen meditation practice, at that time you may start doing your formal meditation training. And this is the meditation hall at Songgwangsa, a place called Susansa. This was one of the later names given to the monastery as well. As you can see, these are very simple rooms. They're just a large open room with an ondo floor, which is heated during the evening. The monks will sit at this spot. They will sleep at that spot, actually, on top of their cushion. And during specific times of the season, they also will eat at that spot too, just in the very late evening. What they're doing when they're sitting there on this cushion is this practice of kanhwa-san, this sun of observing or examining meditative topics. This has some affinities, if you've heard about Japanese rinzai training, where they do koan training. Koans are these sort of enigmatic statements of Zen masters, which are used as sort of topics for meditation as a way of arousing questioning, or what is formerly called doubt, this wijang, sensation of doubt. One of the most famous of these is from a Tang Dynasty Chan teacher, Sun master, named Jiaozhou Congshan, who created this very famous exchange where a student comes and asks Jiaozhou, this Zen master, does a dog have the Buddha nature or not? And Jiaozhou answers, doesn't have it. No, mu. Why would this be a topic of meditation? It's because this eminent Zen master gave the wrong answer. This is wrong. The right answer is yes, does have it. All sentient beings, dogs included, have this Buddha nature. So why would this eminent Zen master have given the wrong answer to this very straightforward question? That's why it becomes a topic of meditation practice then. And so as one thinks about this, you might begin to apply all of that knowledge you have learned in the seminary, trying to understand why he could have given this answer, which clearly is wrong, but he must have had some reason behind that. So what's the reason behind that anyway? What's his meaning in having given this answer? And you might apply all of your doctrinal training, all of your experience that you had in seminary to try to figure this out. Each time you go to your teacher and say, I think I got it, he says, wrong, do it some more, think about it again. Finally, the point of this is that at a certain point, there's so much intense questioning, wondering, what did he mean by saying no when the right answer is yes? But also this very intense frustration with this question. Why can't I understand what he meant by this? He must have had some reason for this. What is that reason? And so this creates this very intense sort of questioning or doubt, which becomes the real focus of practice in the Zen meditation halls. And this is what monks are doing when they're sitting in their cushions for many hours every day. The typical retreat schedule at Songgwangsa, where practice was very highly regarded, was to do about 12 hours of meditation sitting each day during the retreat, about 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And this would be done in blocks of 50 minutes of sitting with 10 minutes of walking. So about halfway through that sitting session, the leader of the hall would walk down the middle of the row of monks with a large stick, the so-called changun jukbi. And if somebody were sort of nodding off, they would get a little reminder to wake up and keep at it. So this is the typical practice for 3 months of the retreat period in the winter and the summer, are about 12 to 14 hours of sitting, 4 to 6 hours of sleep each day. During the winter retreat, in the week leading up to the Buddha's enlightenment, traditionally Korean monks do in meditation hall what they call yongming cheongjin, kind of ferocious training or practice, during which time they will spend 7 days without sleep during this time. So rather than lying down to sleep, they have an extra meal actually at around midnight, and they continue to practice through the evening. This monk, you will know him well, Hyun Bong. This is not Hyun Bong, this is one of our Dharma brothers. He has a stick here he sharpened and put underneath his chin, so if he begins to nod off, he'll get stabbed in the throat to help him stay awake. The point of this is not to torture the monks, although it can seem very masochistic at times. The point is to really force you to maintain your concentration, because what you find is that the minute you allow your mind to wander away from your meditation topic, or that sensation of doubt or questioning that you're cultivating, you're just overwhelmed by this mind-numbing tiredness. My first retreat, I had come from Southeast Asia, from Thailand, and had been doing more kind of mindfulness and vipassana meditation, do nothing about Zen, do nothing about Kanhwa-san or this koan style of training, and was completely at sea as to what is this, why is this meditation even? But I was really determined to try to do the best that I could, so I pretty much toughed it out for the 3 months. In the middle of this 1 week retreat, after about 2 days, I couldn't have told you if I was dreaming I was awake, if I was dreaming I was asleep, if I'm actually being hit, or am I dreaming he's hitting me now? I had no clue. And at the end of the 7 days, you stop at midnight on the last day, and then you begin your normal schedule by getting up at 3 a.m. for the regular retreat schedule the next day. I woke up around probably 10 a.m. in the morning, looked around sheepishly, everybody sitting around me. They had been up for 7 hours already, and I finally was awake. In later retreats, I actually found a lot of benefit in this Yongming Chengjin, but the first retreat was a complete disaster. But what it did do, it helped me to realize if I was going to take vested advantage of my time at Songwangsa and really learn all that I could from the tradition, I really needed to learn more about Korean Buddhism. This kind of started my scholarly career, trying to understand this technique of Kanwa-san and how it could actually serve as a viable form of Buddhist meditation practice. So after some years in meditation hall, monks may then end up deciding to go off to hermitage, where they can practice more intensively with less structure. Maybe they want to sit for 3 hours at a time rather than getting up every 50 minutes to walk. So they go off to hermitage where they can spend their time in designing a more individual practice. And this is what Hyun Bong has done at Gwangwon-am, the monastery of Jinggak Guksa as well. And sometimes they'll come down then to the local the closest monastery for a nice meal on the free days, perhaps. But they spend most of their time up in monasteries, and finally may end up coming back as leaders of their monastery as well. And so you're going to be hearing later from Professor Stiller, who will give you more of a sense of the compound of Songwangsa and the monastic campus there. I hope this talk will give you at least some sense of what's going on in that monastic complex, where this very important painting of the 5 Buddhas will eventually be returned. There is a context where this art is used. It isn't something which is simply displayed for beauty, although it is extremely beautiful. It's used in a specific monastic context, and this is the context that I've tried to outline for you here. And one last picture of Songwangsa in the winter time. So thank you very, very much for the opportunity.